Welcome to the Mystery and History channel. Be sure to subscribe and like so you don't miss out on more videos like this one. The practice known as slave breeding was a strategy of reproductive coercion used during slavery in the United States to increase the number of enslaved people and, as a result, the property of owners. The system allowed legal control over motherhood and family life for enslaved black women, treating human beings as economic resources until official abolition in 1865. Documents from the time show the structural racism and serious social consequences of this practice, whose effects still influence racial disparities in American society. Low child survival among enslaved African children in the United States was one of the most serious consequences of slavery, with estimates indicating that between 30% and 50% did not reach the age of 5. Mothers returning to work soon after childbirth, insufficient food, poor housing conditions, and lack of proper care contributed to this situation. In addition, the constant stress faced by enslaved women affected health during pregnancy, increasing children's vulnerability in the first years of life. The Zong case, which happened in 1781 under the command of Captain Luke Collingwood, was one of the most serious episodes of the transatlantic slave trade. More than 130 Africans lost their lives after a deliberate decision by the crew made to justify an insurance claim. The British ship traveling from Accra to Jamaica claimed a shortage of water to explain the measure. The episode caused scandal in London, sparked legal debates over responsibility, and helped drive the British abolitionist movement in the late 18th century. The uprising of enslaved people in August 1791 in the French colony of Saint-Domingue, the largest producer of sugar and coffee, marked the beginning of the only successful insurrection that created Haiti, the first free black nation in the Americas in 1804. Facing repression from 80,000 soldiers sent by Napoleon and yellow fever, those led by Jean-Jacques Dessalines challenged the colonial system. The economic embargo imposed by Thomas Jefferson showed the country's political and economic isolation. Brazil received between 4.8 and 5.5 million enslaved Africans over nearly 4 centuries, more than any other country in the Americas and about 40% of the transatlantic trade. This labor was essential for sugar plantations in the Northeast, mines in Minas Gerais in the 18th century, and coffee farms in Sao Paulo and Rio in the 19th century. The country was the last in the Americas to abolish slavery on May 13, 1888, while illegal trafficking continued for decades after the 1831 ban. Harriet Tubman was a central figure of the Underground Railroad, helping hundreds of enslaved people escape to the North after escaping slavery herself in 1849. Beyond serving as a conductor in the secret network, she worked as a spy and agent for the Union Army during the Civil War, leading missions in Confederate territory. In June 1863, she commanded an operation along the Combahee River, freeing about 700 enslaved people, the first military action led by a woman in the United States. She lived in poverty and fought for recognition and a military pension. Nat Turner was an enslaved man and African-American religious leader who led the 1831 rebellion in Virginia, one of the most important uprisings of enslaved people in the United States. Inspired by religious visions, he organized an insurrection that resulted in about 60 deaths among the white population, triggering a severe response from authorities. The revolt increased fear among Southern elites and led to stricter laws against enslaved people and the banning of African-American religious gatherings, becoming a defining episode in the struggle for freedom in the 19th century. The rebellion aboard the ship La Amistad in 1839 marked an important episode in the fight against the slave trade in the 19th century. A group of kidnapped Africans took control of the ship, creating a legal standoff in the United States that involved debates over human rights and abolition. The case revealed international tensions over the slave trade and helped mobilize the anti-slavery movement, influencing decisions that recognized the rebels' freedom and made them symbols of resistance. The slave ship Brookes, which carried 482 Africans from Liverpool to the West Indies, shows the extremely harsh conditions of the transatlantic slave trade in the 18th century. The illustration showed captives held under restraint and placed in very tight spaces with almost no ability to move. Published in the 1780s, it became a central piece of the British abolitionist campaign and strengthened the pressure that led to the ban on the trade in 1807, exposing the severity of the slave system. The door of no return on Gorée Island, Senegal, marks the end of the forced journey of thousands of enslaved Africans headed to the Americas during the transatlantic trade. Built in the 17th century as part of the House of Slaves, it symbolizes European colonial rule and the suffering of slavery. Visited by leaders such as Pope John Paul II, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama, it is a crucial memory of the historical impact of the African diaspora, reminding the world of the urgency of recognition and repair for these crimes. The 32 survivors of the Clotilda, the last illegal slave ship to arrive in the United States in 1860, resisted dispersal after the abolition of slavery in 1865 and founded Africatown in Alabama, led by Cudjoe Lewis. This neighborhood preserved African traditions, including the Yoruba language, and created self-government based on ancestral customs, defying Jim Crow racial segregation laws. Africatown became a symbol of cultural resistance and since 2019 has drawn researchers and members of the African diaspora searching for identity. The Agoji warriors formed an elite female army of the Kingdom of Dahomey in present-day Benin in the 18th century, standing out for military skill, discipline, and a controversial role in the transatlantic slave trade. Dahomey became a regional power by capturing neighboring peoples to sell to European traffickers, trading through the strategic ports of Porto Novo and Ouidah. This African participation reveals complex dynamics of power, resistance, and survival, shaped by internal conflicts and outside interests. Charles X ordered a naval fleet to pressure Haiti into paying an indemnity of 150 million francs, demanded after the abolition of slavery and the loss of French colonial property on the island. This action took place in a tense post-colonial context, since Haiti, the first free black republic in 1804, faced severe economic sanctions from France. The charge deeply affected Haiti's economy for decades, perpetuating inequalities and influencing its political and social development. Toussaint Louverture, born in 1743 in Saint-Domingue, became known as a brilliant military leader in the Haitian Revolution, one of the most important liberation movements of the colonial era. Formerly enslaved and trained in traditional medicine, he turned a group of enslaved people into a disciplined army, defeating French, Spanish, and British forces between 1791 and 1802 with tactics inspired by European warfare. Betrayed by Napoleon, he was arrested in 1802 and died at Fort de Joux in 1803, shortly before Haiti's independence was proclaimed in 1804. Cerro Rico of Potosi, located at about 13,123 feet in the Bolivian Andes, became famous beginning in 1545 for its silver reserves, which fueled the Spanish colonial economy. In the 17th century, Potosi surpassed several European capitals in population because of intense mining carried out by indigenous peoples subjected to the Mita system and forced labor. Exposure to cold, altitude, dust, and mercury was associated with estimated human losses between 8 and 9 million. As the native population declined, enslaved Africans were also taken to the site. The silver financed the Spanish Empire and global trade, especially with China. Abraham Lincoln's signing of the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863, marked a decisive moment in the American Civil War by declaring enslaved people free in Confederate states in rebellion, where the federal government had no control. The measure did not affect slaveholding states loyal to the Union, showing a strategy to prevent Great Britain from supporting the Confederacy and to turn the conflict into a fight against slavery. It also authorized the enlistment of black men in Union forces, changing the political and military course of the war. Special Field Order No. 15, issued in 1865 by General Sherman, tried to address Reconstruction injustices by distributing 40-acre plots of land confiscated from Confederates to families of freed Africans, with a promise of mules for farm work. However, in September, President Andrew Johnson revoked the measure and ordered the freed people removed. This reversal blocked black economic autonomy and reinforced racial inequality, keeping land concentration in white hands. Phillis Wheatley was the first African American poet to publish a book of poems in 1773 in Boston, while it was still under British colonial rule. Enslaved and brought from Africa as a child, she gained literary recognition by writing verses that engaged with classical culture and Enlightenment ideals, drawing the attention of figures such as John Hancock and George Washington. Her work challenged racial prejudices of the time and remains a landmark of cultural resistance during the period of slavery in the United States. The transatlantic trade of enslaved people ended in the 19th century, while the legal abolition of formal slavery was completed in different regions across the 20th century. However, contemporary forms of exploitation persist, including forced labor, coercion in intimate contexts, and domestic servitude, affecting tens of millions of people, according to international organizations. This continuity reflects inequalities inherited from the historical trade, especially in the Americas, where racial disparities in health, education, and income remain clear and show the lasting impact of this system. The passage in Virginia in 1662 of the law known as Parta Sequitur Ventrum changed slavery in British America by declaring that enslaved status would be inherited from the mother, not the father. This created a hereditary system in which the children of enslaved women were also automatically enslaved, regardless of paternity. The rule encouraged coercion against these women as a way to increase owners' property. Later adopted in other slaveholding colonies, the law expanded hereditary slavery and deeply affected social and economic development. Cha seasoning was a domination technique applied to Africans newly forced into the slave system, meant to weaken their physical and emotional autonomy and make them submissive workers. Over a period of 1 to 3 years, they were subjected to excessive workdays, strict control, and separation from family and companions, making it harder to preserve bonds. Diseases such as malaria and dysentery meant that up to half did not survive the first year. Documented in manuals of the time, the method revealed the inhumanity of slavery and its deep social impacts. The creation of the first organized slave patrol in the Americas by South Carolina in 1704 represented an expansion of repression against the freedom of enslaved Africans. Known as patrollers or paddy rollers, these patrols, made up of poor white men, had legal powers to control black people, maintaining the order of the slave system and the social hierarchy. They were precursors to police departments in the southern United States, showing how public safety emerged tied to surveillance over black bodies. The Black Code, issued in 1685 by King Louis XIV, established strict laws on slavery in French colonies, organizing into 60 articles the legal control of enslaved people as movable property. It set physical sanctions and extreme penalties, while also imposing obligations on owners, such as baptism and minimum food provisions. In force for more than a century, it deeply shaped colonial social and economic structures, perpetuating the stripping away of rights and dehumanization until the end of the slave system in the Americas. The Bourbous Revolt of 1763 was one of the longest uprisings of enslaved people in the Americas, led by Cuffy, who brought together more than 3,000 people to challenge Dutch rule in the colony of Bourbous, present-day Guyana. After controlling much of the territory and declaring himself governor, Cuffy proposed dividing the colony between freed Africans and colonists. The Dutch refusal led to a siege that lasted almost a year. The resistance ended after Cuffy's death, and he became a symbol of the fight for freedom, honored on Guyana's Republic Day, celebrated on February 23rd. John Gabriel Stedman was a Dutch military officer sent to Suriname between 1772 and 1777 to suppress resisting Maroon communities in a colony marked by the extreme rigidity of the plantation system. His diary, published in 1796 with illustrations by William Blake, revealed to European readers the treatment imposed on enslaved people and the conditions that caused low survival and constant importation of Africans. The Maroons, descendants of Africans who escaped plantations, created autonomous forest communities that remain today, preserving languages and traditions from 17th century West Africa. The Ashanti Kingdom, in present-day Ghana, played a major role in the transatlantic trade of enslaved people between the 18th and 19th centuries. Its empire financed military expansion by selling prisoners of war to European traffickers, creating a violent cycle in which weapons increased its military strength. Between 1700 and 1807, hundreds of thousands were sold on the Gold Coast. In 2019, Ghana's president officially acknowledged this participation while honoring the culture of the African diaspora. The Dutch West India Company, founded in 1621, was the main agent of the transatlantic trade of enslaved Africans in the 17th century, operating with a state mandate and private participation. The capture of the Portuguese fort of Elmina in 1637 gave the company a base to export thousands of enslaved people to colonies such as Brazil, Suriname, and New Amsterdam, where its presence left marks, including the wall built by Africans on Wall Street, showing its economic and social impact on colonial trade and urban formation in those regions. Denmark played a significant role in the transatlantic trade of enslaved people by controlling the Virgin Islands between 1672 and 1917, using St. Thomas, St. Croix, and St. John to produce sugar with forced African labor. In 1792, it became the first country to ban the trade, but allowed a decade for adjustment, which increased activity. In 1848, the revolt in St. Croix led to immediate emancipation ordered by the governor. In 1917, the islands were sold to the United States for $25 million in gold, ending Danish presence. The Arab-Islamic trade of enslaved Africans, active from the 7th century to the 20th century, captured and transported between 10 and 18 million people over roughly 1,300 years. The main routes crossed the Sahara, the Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean under extremely harsh conditions and with human losses estimated between 20% and 40%. Most of the people transported were women, sent to work in homes, workshops, mines, and palaces in North Africa and the Middle East. Unlike the transatlantic trade, this system remained active until abolition in Saudi Arabia in 1962. The transatlantic slave trade between 1441 and 1866 involved the capture and forced transport of about 12.5 million Africans to the Americas, of whom roughly 2 million did not survive the crossing. Supported by European powers, African kingdoms, and financial institutions, it was an economic system based on coercion and the stripping away of rights. Brazil was the main destination, receiving 4.8 million people, almost 40% of the total, and far more than other countries in the Americas. The United States received about 400,000. The Germantown Petition against slavery, dated 1688 in Pennsylvania, marks one of the earliest organized records against slavery in colonial America, presented by members of the Quaker movement. This document expressed moral and religious opposition to slavery, gradually influencing the spread of abolitionist ideas in the 18th century. Quaker resistance to slavery helped strengthen the anti-slavery movement, which would later play a decisive role in advancing civil rights in the United States. The Boston episode, which happened on March 5, 1770, was decisive in the escalation of conflict between American colonists and British rule, when British soldiers fired on unarmed civilians, resulting in 5 deaths. Among those struck was Crispus Attucks, later recognized as the first major symbolic figure of the American Revolution. The event intensified colonial resistance, united groups opposed to British authority, and prepared the ground for United States independence, becoming a symbol of the fight for freedom. The White House, built between 1792 and 1800, relied on the labor of enslaved Africans who cut wood, made bricks, and performed manual work, hired out to the federal government without being paid, exposing exploitation in the foundation of a symbol of American democracy. Their identities were largely erased, although research from 2019 recovered fragmentary data. In 2016, Michelle Obama acknowledged this heritage, highlighting historical erasure and encouraging debates about repair. Universities in the United States, such as Harvard, Yale, Brown, and Georgetown, have ties to slavery dating back to colonization. Harvard received donations from enslavers beginning in the 17th century, amounting to $27.8 million in today's value. Yale had funding linked to Elihu Yale, who was involved in human trafficking. In 1838, Georgetown sold 272 enslaved people to pay debts, a fact acknowledged in 2016. Recently, Harvard allocated $100 million to address its participation in the slave system. Fountain Hughes, born in 1848, was one of the last African Americans to narrate his experience of slavery in the United States, recorded in 1949 by the Federal Writers Project. His story offers valuable testimony about the extreme hardships of bondage in the South before the Civil War, while also highlighting different forms of resistance developed by enslaved people. Hughes lived as a free man after abolition, but faced the social and economic effects of that legacy until his death in 1957, illustrating the slow pace of racial change in American society. The music created by enslaved Africans in the Americas forms the root of global genres such as jazz, blues, gospel, reggae, and samba, born as forms of communication, resistance, and cultural preservation. Work songs and spirituals carrying rhythms and techniques from West Africa also functioned as codes for escape and hope. Artists such as Louis Armstrong, Billie Holiday, and James Brown are direct heirs of this cultural legacy, which deeply shaped contemporary music around the world. Frederick Douglass was an abolitionist and formerly enslaved man, known for his eloquence and activism against slavery in the United States in the 19th century. The phrase attributed to a slave owner reveals the fear white elites had of educating black people because they knew knowledge would strengthen the fight for freedom and civil rights. Douglass, taught to read in secret, became a symbol of resistance and of education's power for emancipation, influencing racial equality movements and social reforms. The gathered African American soldiers were part of the United States Colored Troops, who fought for the Union during the American Civil War between 1861 and 1865. These units, made up mainly of formerly enslaved men and free black men, marked the struggle for freedom and racial equality, contributing decisively to the Union victory and the abolition of slavery in the United States. The formal record of the group in a military camp reinforces their official recognition. Southern United States cuisine was shaped by practices and ingredients brought by enslaved Africans, such as okra, black-eyed peas, long-grain rice, and techniques like deep frying and seasoned stews. These elements from West and Central African traditions were essential to Southern flavor. However, their contributions were denied, with recipes credited to white housewives, erasing the authorship of black cooks and perpetuating a cultural injustice still discussed today. Markets for enslaved people were common in the southern United States in the 19th century, especially before the American Civil War, between 1861 and 1865. These markets served as centers where owners sold black people held in slavery, showing the inhuman nature of a system sustained by forced labor. The trade perpetuated the denial of rights and the transformation of millions of people into property, while also fueling tensions that contributed to the abolition of slavery in 1865 with the ratification of the 13th Amendment. The photograph shows a group of African Americans formally dressed in an indoor setting, reflecting the period after the American Civil War, when formerly enslaved people sought to strengthen civil and social gains. The image symbolizes the collective effort of freed people for education and rights, possibly connected to the Freedmen's Bureau, created in 1865 to help with the transition to full citizenship while facing resistance in the South. The seriousness of the group expresses their determination to affirm dignity in the history of emancipation. The 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, ratified in December 1865, formally ended slavery, but included an exception that allowed forced labor as punishment for a crime after legal conviction. This loophole was exploited by Southern states, which created laws to disproportionately arrest freed black people for crimes such as vagrancy, keeping them as near slave labor through the convict leasing system. This practice lasted until the 1940s, showing that full freedom took much longer to be achieved for black people. General Gordon Granger entered Galveston, Texas on June 19, 1865, to officially announce the end of slavery in the state, more than 2 years after President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. This action marked the practical outcome of freedom for millions of African Americans in the southern United States, ending local resistance to abolition. Since then, Juneteenth has become an annual symbol of resistance and celebration of emancipation, highlighting the struggles and achievements of the black community after the American Civil War. If you enjoyed this video and want to support the channel, please use the Super Thanks tool below. Your contribution helps us keep bringing you amazing historical content. Thank you so much for your support, and see you in the next video.